And there we are. Welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz here. Michael D. Shaw is my guest, as is our habit weekly. Mike, how are you?
Just great.
I'm getting a little echo on your side, but I think it's okay. Maybe tweak down your treble a little bit there. I want to obviously talk about the big story today, which is the proliferation of protesters. I had a chance yesterday to kind of make my way around Harvard and MIT, and I see the kids there with the keffiyehs and these very expensive tents that all popped up like simultaneously over at MIT. And at Emerson, they were blocking a passageway, which basically students couldn't get to school. I'm surprised this is happening in Boston because even though we have a liberal reputation, when it comes to these sorts of things, Boston doesn't screw around. They'll arrest people, sweep them right up. But that's not happening. And my impression is that most of these kids are the most pliable, useful idiots I've ever seen. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They have no idea what it's about. Someone actually went in and did some on the street interviews at Columbia, and I was watching them, and nobody would talk to him. And he was just saying, "Hey, why are you here? What are you doing here? What is this? What do you believe in?" And they were like, "We can't talk to you. Go to the table over there where there are media experts. They'll handle it."
Well, of course, I mean, it should be obvious, but it isn't.
Yeah.
And I guess this is going to keep going on forever. Those of us old enough to remember the civil rights era, they didn't have the astroturf term back in those days, but so many of those protesters were hired.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's
there,
obviously there's big money behind this, and there's international money. And I heard Alan Dershowitz comment on it, and I think that he's absolutely right in that he notes that back then, as a young attorney, he actually represented some of these radicals. And he said that what he came to realize was that these well-meaning nincompoops at the colleges, out of that milieu is going to come a more radical strand. And he points to, like, for example, the Weathermen back in the 60s.
oh yeah,
Out of them, who were mostly just these same dumb college elitists born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Out of that milieu came the Weather Underground, which were a highly radicalized group of terrorists, people like Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn, and there's these others who started putting bombs under the Pentagon. In the case here in Boston, they robbed a local bank in order to get money to buy munitions, and in the process, they murdered by shooting him in the back Officer Walter Schroeder, the father of 8 children, who was simply there to try to arrest these people. Um, Susan Sachs was involved as she was the getaway driver. They all went to prison. I mean, the shooter went to prison for life. Susan Sachs was released after 30 years. But the point I'm making is that out of this whole pro-Hamas, pro-Mullah, pro-radical group is going to come these highly organized extremists who are going to start to do stuff that probably will make the Weather Underground look like Cub Scouts. And it could happen very quickly. It could happen if it's not checked now. It really could start happening within months, where they really do start to bomb and dynamite synagogues and Jewish religious sites and general American sites, because obviously they're anti-American. It's not just anti-Jewish and anti-Israel. It's anti-America. I mean, at its core, they're anti-God, and it's just another rendition. I mean, I see it in a sense as I'm seeing the same people out there operating at the core of this. I mean, the ones that I've seen, the visible ones, that did the Pussy Hat rallies, that did the the Kristallnacht against black people after George Floyd's death, radicalizing that and making that into something when in fact he died of natural causes, but putting that aside. Where they started to loot black businesses, burn black neighborhoods, and murder black children. I mean, it's the same thing. And as we head into the summer, I think we can expect at least that same sort of reaction. They're going to start burning cities.
Well, I think the first thing that has to be realized is that these are the shock troops for the uniparty and the corrupt government. All right. I mean, no one seems to wonder, maybe except you, as to how did this get so organized? Where did these expensive tents come from, et cetera, et cetera? It's obviously fake, obviously. But if you look at the news media, who is the greatest useful idiot of all, I suppose, this is getting coverage. But the question you have to ask yourself, how come these protests aren't being put down? How come they're being allowed? How come the BLM protests were allowed? It's very simple. The shock troops for the government. People have to come to the conclusion that this is a massive conspiracy to steal the minds of the common man into thinking that this is somehow some natural phenomenon. They simply took the occasion of the Israeli Gaza situation as a mere excuse to start this. Same thing. Nobody cared about George Floyd, a career criminal thug, but that was a great occasion to use for those protests. And as long as people are stupid enough to buy into this, it's going to go on forever. It hasn't changed since the early 60s civil rights protests, which were largely fake and inspired. I mean, they know it was inspired by the Soviets. So why should it change?
Well, first of all, to give credit where it's due, the University of Texas in Austin and the University of Minnesota, apparently, they did crack down. They did arrest the people. They ripped down the tents as soon as they went up, and Governor Abbott stepped out with the National Guard. So, there are some cities and some states that seem to be doing the right thing in this regard. But the question that I wonder
They're the
about,
minority, Chuck.
oh, they are. But the thing I wonder about in this case, like in the case of George Floyd, that was obviously an attempt to try to destroy Trump and remove the Trump administration. It was used as an excuse to, along with COVID, of course, which now we know is a pandemic, was used as a way to, do the largest junk mail in history of ballots and other various activities that led to the defeat of Trump. But in this case, it's Biden in office. I don't see how this helps Biden. I think it hurts him.
I
think it's
don't
hurting
know
the regime.
that the goal is so much to help Biden. I think the goal is to promote a sense of hopelessness among the population, a sense of isolation and alienation, which is just going to help the uniparty.
It's going to help Trump because people are going to reject it. His polling numbers are going up in every battleground state. Trump has pulled up in some cases by big numbers. This last mainstream, Mockingbird poll, they had him up by 8 in Nevada and 6 in Arizona. The only state where he's down slightly is Michigan by 2, which is in the margin of error. And he's up by 2 in Pennsylvania within the margin of error. But all of the other battleground states, he's way up. And it's only those states that he needs to win. He's obviously going to take all the states that he took in 2020. So, I think he's actually going to pick up in New York. because I think people in New York are rejecting these horrendous lawfare cases. The phony case in Manhattan involving payoff to a hooker, even if it's true, is backfiring on them. Now, even the New York Times admits that there's really no case, and that so they said they're using it to try to fan the flames of hatred by women against Trump. They figure they're going to demonize him. They're bringing up, the that tape, the Billy Bush tape, and they're going to trot out the hooker dressed as the Virgin Mary, right? Right. They make her look like she's going to be rehabilitated, and they're going to try to put out sordid, stories about Trump's sex life and other stuff that has nothing to do with anything, and as a way to try to gin up hatred amongst women. I think that's the strategy now. And meanwhile, Trump is turning it into a spectacle, and he's handling it quite adroitly and quite brilliantly. I mean,
Yeah,
Trump
I would
Tower
agree.
has Trump Tower has become the White House in exile. He's now had the former president of Poland come over, the former president of Japan, the prime minister of Japan has showed up. There's been pictures. I mean, he's being very kind of presidential, and people are coming in, and plus he's going on these outings over to the bodega where he's being cheered and loved by people. You'll never see Biden get that. I mean, it's hard. His
Well,
public
weren't there
appearances
weren't there a couple of cases where Biden tried to go out with the common man and was essentially ignored? He went
ignored. I mean,
to
and when he speaks, it's horrible. I mean, I think that special prosecutor Robert Hur basically laid it out in his testimony about what it's like to sit with Biden privately and talk to him. It's Looney Tunes. I mean, the man is obviously mentally declining very rapidly. I mean, the way Hurd described it, if you listen to that testimony, he would just go off on these bizarre tangents of stories of his youth when he was doing these weird things, and he's taking credit. I mean, the Uncle Bozy died, being eaten by cannibals, and then he's talking about how he drove an 18-wheeler, and
yeah,
things that are like not coherent, and lies putting aside, but just not connected to anything that the special prosecutor was talking about, and had no memory. I mean, and it's like he cannot cognitively function. And that's obvious to anybody who observes him. These most recent forays into the campaign world by him have been absolutely mortifying for them. I mean, it's just obvious that this poor man is a shell. And it's so he thinks he's going to go out and campaign, I guess the strategy, while Trump is trapped in New York, and it's really backfiring on them in a big way.
yeah, I would agree. And of course, it opens up other questions. All right, why are they promoting this guy? All right, is there no one on the bench at all? And maybe that's one reason. Newsom would be a joke. So on the other hand, Biden really hasn't been the president. Many people say it's actually Obama pulling the strings.
Right.
So for those that want to maintain this corrupt situation, where Obama and his minions, and of course Obama was very closely connected to the Weather Underground people that you mentioned earlier in the show.
Well, that
Um,
didn't seem to hurt him, though. I mean, I think that Obama is behind the scenes, according to a lot of people, and yet, it's too late to come up and manufacture another Obama. There's only about 5 months before election time. I mean, it's like they've kind of like put. I think that either they put all of their chips on the likelihood of trying to steal the election, frankly.
yeah.
And by the way, I want to be careful right now because I'm running this on YouTube.
Oh,
Um, yeah, no, that's okay. I didn't say anything. I have not commented on what happened or what we might think happened. I'm pointing out only that you've got, I follow Mark Eisen on Twitter, and he's bragging about the lawsuits he's bringing to keep the polls open. And good news, we can keep the absentee ballots functioning in this state. And we can keep the polls open in that state, and we can continue counting here. And then, so, maybe that's it. I mean, I don't know what else they have, unless there's some kind of
Have you ever
an
wondered
October surprise. I don't know.
Have you ever wondered what Mark Ison's dog is in the fight, other than making a lot of money being a criminal? I mean, what is it? What is the reason to promote this? He's not.
Well, what's the reason? What's the reason why all of these Trump haters? I mean, the Gateway Pundit just did an article. Someone uncovered the fact that they're having these same Zoom meetings that they had in 2020, as described by Molly Ball in the Time Magazine article, and they show a picture of them, and it's people like Eisen and Weissman and Tubin, the guy that was masturbating on Zoom, and a bunch of other unsavory characters. The husband of Kellyanne Conway, it's really one of the weirdest of all people, really a reprobate. And some of these other geniuses are sitting there meeting up on Zoom every week and strategizing on how to stop Trump, including these phony conservatives like who is it? Not Podorets, the other one, the one publisher of one of these conservative journals. Anyways, hates Trump.
No,
and
George Will.
Well, he's not part of this, but some of these other guys, these big mugwump establishment uniparty so-called Republicans, they're sitting around and they're doing the same strategizing. What can we do to stop Trump? The playbook seems to be the same. He's going to be a dictator. He's an authoritarian, and at the same time, in the exact opposite, he's an imbecile who's too weak to do anything. So they have both narratives going at the same moment.
Yeah, well, what's going on? I mean, the animus against Trump is fairly obvious, all right? There are thousands, if not millions, of corrupt individuals who are living off this terrible system. I mean, how ironic is it that the five-star general himself, in his farewell address in 1961, warned us against the military-industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was a military guy his whole life, and he finally realized what a crock it all was. And he was trying, I think, way too late to warn people about it. But there are untold numbers of people who are profiting off this. Have you ever wondered why nothing ever changes? We talked about this last week. These so-called firebrands in Congress, Jim Jordan, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what? Nothing happens. The Democrats are always in power, even if they're not in power. This latest capitulation with this Ukraine thing, I mean, how much more evidence do you need that the system is broken? So the biggest threat is a rich guy who has no interest in feeding off this corrupt system. He's made his, so he's uncontrollable. That's why they fear him so much. That's why they hate him so much.
Because, and that's why I think they're not going to let him serve.
Well, look,
there's
Ronald Reagan, to use one example, Ronald Reagan had the intention, supposedly, of closing the Department of Education when it had barely just started.
Look what happened. Look what happened to Reagan.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, within a month of his taking office, he was shot.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a clear message not to F around with the establishment. I mean, and afterwards, he kind of was a little bit more limited. I mean, he got a lot done, especially when it came to destroying the Soviet Union and other areas. But, I think that he at that point realized.
Think about that, though. Think about that. The destruction of the Soviet Union was tied hand in glove into building up the military-industrial complex. So once he started kissing the butts of this corrupt establishment, then it was full steam ahead. But I find it very interesting that the one time he tried to take down the pointless bureaucracy, and there was no more pointless bureaucracy than Department of Education, which had just basically started. All right.
Exactly. He could have
He
done
was,
it because it was only a year or two old
yeah,
when he took office, and he ran on promising to do that, and he
but he
didn't
found
even.
out real quick that that wasn't going to be accepted by the people in
Well,
charge. All
I mean,
right.
I think we could look at history. I mean, Kennedy found out pretty tragically that you can't mess around with that military industrial complex. That's probably why Eisenhower waited until the evening before he
That's
left
right. Yeah.
office before throwing that little piece of dynamite out there. It's like, bye, and by the way, this is
Yeah, well, I
what's
mean,
going
isn't it
on.
great? Here's an old guy that he was, supposedly a war hero, and now he's going out to pasture. And fine, no one's going to hurt the guy at this point. But yeah, what was this was sort of like the Soviet Union declaring war on Japan after the first bomb was dropped.
Oh
So
yeah, and that was a deal that was made by FDR, I think, at one of those conferences,
yeah,
where basically he said, "Well, you can come in then and pick up a few pieces of the spoils." But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of inside machinations that have gone on and do go on, and given that context, I do worry about whether Trump is going to be able to make it that far. I mean, they, I think that there's evidence that they're setting up a trap where they can launch an impeachment the day he steps in. I mean, they're never going to let up. It's just, it's
well, right, but here's the nice thing about that. Most of these strategies have backfired. The lawfare, and you go ahead and try having impeachment every day. That's going to backfire. There's going to be some true believers. They're going to stick to this forever. But I think what's going to be exposed is most of the true believers are part of this cabal that is feeding off the bountiful breast, so to speak, of this military industrial complex. And let's not forget the healthcare industrial complex, which Eisenhower had no idea would occur, which is actually bigger than the military. So maybe some people will wake up. But Trump, I think, is smarter than Reagan and JFK in terms of the street smarts. He knows
yeah,
what's going on.
yep.
And I think if anybody can navigate through this gauntlet, it would probably be him.
Yeah, but the opposition is it's also they're becoming even more deranged. I mean, the Benny Thompson is saying we're going to pull his Secret Service protection. You've got the way these absolute jackals are covering this trial in Manhattan. It's like weird. It's like almost like they worship Trump. They're obsessed with him. You see people like Rachel Maddow. Oh, I saw him going into the building. Oh, and he looked stooped over, and they're like, I thought that Jesse Waters over at Fox, he does a pretty good job. He said it's almost like the way Hong Kong, not Hong Kong, King Kong, the movie in the 1930s, the way they portrayed the monster. They brought him into Manhattan and they put him up on a cage, and people were fascinated by it, and they would go in and they would be in the theater. Eventually, he broke out of the cage, but it's like that's how they're treating Trump. It's like, oh, I got to see him, and he looked orange, and they're like analyzing every move, and he was like falling asleep at the table, and he looked agonized. And there's like this sadistic, sick idea that somehow they're getting some kind of a pleasure out of his suffering, is allegedly. I don't think Trump is suffering; he's fine. But who the hell wants to sit through 8 hours of a trial? But it's like they're not talking about the actual case. They're not talking about the evidence.
Well,
You're not going to
there's
hear
nothing to talk about. And
right.
for those few people that keep watching the mainstream media, that's a whole other thing that has troubled me for a long time. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. What is the audience for these shows? Given the immediate availability of news on the internet, on your phone, anywhere, who watches these 1 to 2 hour programs anyway?
I think that they've lost most of the influence, whatever influence they may have had, because as we saw, Tucker Carlson's Twitter X show got 3 times the following as MSNBC or as
Oh, more
Fox.
than that.
Yeah, so they're all just chattering away at each other and kind of like pleasuring themselves, if I may. I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
I
I
don't know.
think what's going on here too is lack of alternatives on the commerce side. In other words, if you're a consumer product or you're a big pharma product, well, what are you supposed to do? Well, advertise on television. All right. Well, nobody watches real-time TV anymore.
Right.
Well, I know, but what else could we do? So you maintain this momentum for a while of this nonsense. And there, I'm sure, is a hardcore audience of people on both sides. People who like to think they're flaming liberals. And these are a lot of these dropout hippies from the 60s. And you've seen these people. They
Oh yeah.
still go to this Grateful Dead stuff. And, they're lost in that era, and God bless. And on the other side, there are people who consider themselves conservative. I have Fox News on TV 24/7 or whatever. All right. So there is that small audience, but I think where the uniparty establishment is blowing it is if it gets to the point that the economy is so bad and the inflation is so rampant that you really don't have time to sit there and watch Rachel Maddow. Never mind that she's been wrong about everything her entire career. All right. Now you're worried about, hey, how am I going to pay for groceries? It's going to backfire. The problem is it takes too long for this stuff to play out in real time. All right. I have no doubt that X number of years from now, no one's going to be watching network news. But we have to live in the now, and it's still there. All right. So that's why it's encouraging that people like Tucker Carlson and others have found alternative platforms.
Yeah, and I think that their views are old, they're calcified, they are increasingly shrinking. Their base of Trump hate is shrinking. It's even shrinking, frankly, among the Jewish community. People are like not so much sotto voce anymore. They're starting
Do
to
you
speak
really
out.
think so? Do you really think so? I mean,
Yes, I
what
do.
percentage are the
Oh,
Democrats?
I think that Trump is going to do much. I mean, I was actually at a group Seder on the second night of Passover, and there were people openly supporting Trump. I was,
Wow.
coming out, coming right out and like, hey, Biden is stabbing Israel in the back. I mean, he thinks he's going to get the squad who is controlling the Democratic Party and who's viciously anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, anti-God, anti-Christian, anti-American. I think people see that. They're waking up. Uh, I think that they've got nothing. They've got this small cadre of cult of Trump haters that's shrinking, that's becoming more irrelevant, that's being exposed every day as irrational because they've got no reason to hate Trump. I mean, it's like bizarre. I actually had a conversation with a close relative of mine a couple of days ago who hates Trump, and I asked him why, and he said, "Well, because back 20 years ago, he came out as a businessman against Native American casinos because he said they had an unfair advantage over his casino. I'm like, what? So, what are they sacrosanct? I mean, please. I mean, that means he's got something
That
against
was
Native
it?
American?
That was it?
Yeah. I mean, I'm like, first of all, he's probably winning amongst Native Americans. Putting that aside, it's like, really? I mean, this is so, it doesn't it doesn't add up. It's not rational. And my point to him is, even if that were true, maybe he made an insulting comment about Native Americans. You're going to sell out the whole country now over that? You're going to support this rotten regime that has open borders and that where a hamburger at McDonald's costs $15? I mean, is that what you want? So because of this some stupid comment maybe that he made 20 years ago, it's not rational. And I think that the numbers are shrinking and they're becoming, and as those numbers shrink, the diehards are becoming more crazed, more angry, more openly so, as they thrash around. Reminds me of the supporters. I don't know why, but it's sort of like the supporters of Michael Dukakis in the final days of the,
Oh, I know where you go.
of
Okay.
the 1988 campaign. They became so unhinged, and that, I mean, their last gasp was, the word liberal is not a bad word. We have to be proud to say liberal. That was their last gasp as they went down in flames. And I think there's the same phenomena now. Trump is gaining across the board and they're going down. I mean, I just think that unless they pull, even if they pull some kind of an October surprise, I mean, there still seems to be the only card they're playing is they're going for lawfare. Now you have that corrupt, rotten attorney general in Michigan. I'm criticizing here, but she's a lesbian. Not that that matters. Saying that she's
It probably
indicting.
does matter, but go ahead.
Well, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, all right.
She's indicting these people who claim to be alternative delegates in 2020. Now,
How is
first of
that a
all,
crime?
yeah, I mean, they did nothing wrong. And they show these people, there's 8 of them. We're talking about an 80-year-old woman who's never committed a crime in her life. All of a sudden, she's being dragged into court and she faces prison time. Does that look good? Is that what they want? I mean, they think this is going to be, oh, but we're going to get Trump because he questioned the election. First of all, the whole theory of having alternative delegates was created by Lawrence Tribe, who, by the way, is one of the participants in this Trump hater Zoom project I was mentioning, and who did it because he was trying to help Gore.
Well, not to make a pun here, but boy, did Larry Tribe go off the reservation.
Well, he's always been crazy, apparently. But and you look at his Twitter page. I mean, talk about putting on a tinfoil hat. I mean, weird conspiracy theories about Trump. I mean, these are the people who will point a finger and say, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist." But he's the one as one of America's preeminent legal minds came up with this theory of creating alternative delegates, and he did it for Gore in Florida during the recount, the Chad recount, and the hanging Chads.
Yeah.
So this has been around. It's a legal theory, and when it comes to the way law is supposed to work in this country, this is what lawyers do. They come up with legal theories as a way to defend a client, or as a way to present a position. I mean, there's nothing illegal about that. If they're gonna criminalize that, then this country is going to be in big trouble. But I only bring it up because they're now moving forward with these sort of new levels of lawfare. They're bringing this up in Michigan and in Arizona. The attorney general there, who quote won in 2022 on, I think it was less than 100 votes, when after disqualifying Cochise County, which those votes have never been tabulated. Okay, she's now saying, "Oh well, we're going to sue these alternative delegates," and in both cases, they've named Trump as an unindicted co-conspirator. So they're bringing up this is their playbook. All the other lawfare cases are falling, so they're really grasping at straws.
Well,
And
here's the
just
good news about that. You mentioned the attorney general in Michigan
yeah,
and bringing the stupid case against these old people and whatnot. Maybe your viewers will remember what broke the back of the illegal downloading of music was the RIAA, Recording Industry Association of America, started going after people who they determined had a large collection of songs that they procured via Napster back then.
oh yeah, sure, I
All right.
remember Napster,
And
yeah.
in the case that destroyed them, and I don't want to comment on the sexual preference of the head of RIAA at that time. We'll let people fill in the blanks. They brought a case against some poor kid in Harlem who was living in some crummy apartment, single mother, etc., etc. And they were going to fine him a gazillion dollars. And they were so hell bent on doing this, it completely exploded in their face as being stupid and ridiculous. And why pick on this poor kid? He's not selling this music, it's for his own enjoyment and so on. And that absolutely collapsed the entire effort against this so-called illegal procurement of music. So, I'm saying bring it on. Bring on the lawfare, and you're going to destroy yourself. And great.
And that's their final straw. They're talking about this absolutely ridiculous gag order against Trump in New York. He can't speak. This judge has decreed this. It's completely unconstitutional. The gag order is supposed to protect the defendant, not make
Well,
not
that's
gag the
exactly
defendant.
right. It's a complete perversion.
And
The
then
gag
you have
order-
all these great legal, leftist legal people saying, well, if Trump violates the gag order, they have to send him immediately to Rikers Island in handcuffs. I say let him do it. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be talk about the photo op. I mean, you want to talk about the mugshot.
Yeah.
That's there's a reason why Trump is surging among African Americans right now,
Oh,
right, who are targeted by this rotten
do
establishment.
this as a thought experiment. This will be fun for the audience too. All right. Let's say they put Trump in handcuffs. They take him to Rikers Island. All right. The cheers of the convicts. Some people have this absurd notion that these convicts are liberal. No, they're not.
Oh no, they love Trump. He's a
Yeah.
hero amongst them, and just yes, that would be amazing. I mean, it's oh my God. I mean, I just hope that it might not end up. I mean, it's dangerous.
No,
It
of
could
course.
be like Jeffrey Epstein, if you get my drift.
Yeah, but I
But
mean, the point is that these thought leaders on the left have no concept of real life. It's almost amusing. Do
oh
they?
yeah, I mean, the
really
whole
think-
Fannie Willis thing completely blew up in their face. With those mug shots, they thought, oh, this would really screw Trump, and it just he surged after that.
Yeah, they're on all these T-shirts, right?
Oh man. So yes, I mean, look, I think that I mean, we can't get too giddy over this because
No,
it seems like it's moving in the right direction, but who knows what they're going to pull out between now and then? I mean, what kind of an October surprise?
well, I don't
we
want
might
to tempt
expect?
fate, Chuck, but I truly don't think they have the talent.
No, they seem to be a little
I
short
haven't
at the
seen
bench.
it. I haven't seen it. They have their shock troops of the Pro-Hamas and formerly the BLM and Antifa and all this. They have the idiots in the Mockingbird media. But
I don't see how, to get back to that subject, the pro-Hamas rally is going to help them.
no,
It looks like there's a lot of people at those things, but it's the same scumbags who are, as I said, who are at the Pussy Hat rallies
yeah,
and who are throwing acid in the faces of old ladies
yeah.
who are out to support President Trump. I think that the majority of students even at places like Harvard are not part of this. They're keeping quiet because the loudmouths are dangerous and they're the ones who get all the attention, which they love and they're basking in. And, it's easier to just sort of keep your head low and get on with it than to get into anything with these people, as I certainly know from having had dialogues with them over the years and still do. It's not worth it. It's not worth your own safety. It's not worth your own well-being to get into a scuffle with these people. So they're not doing it, but they are going to do it in the sanctity of the voting booth. They're not going to support this crap. I mean, they're not. I actually met an Israeli couple yesterday in my travels in Boston who just had arrived from Israel, and the wife was going to be taking a course at Sloan Institute at MIT, which is a very revered business school.
Yes.
She was getting some of the certificate, and they seemed a little rattled by what was going on. And I assured them that this is not the majority of Boston, that these people are just a small group of nuts. Don't be concerned about them. I mean, I give them the finger. I mean, don't worry about it. I think that that's really the sentiment. Most people do not support this. It's really nothing more than a bunch of a motley crew of leftists and some of the Jew haters on other sides of the political spectrum who are joining them, and that's it. That doesn't mean let them run roughshod. I think that if Columbia in New York did not clear them of that campus, away from that campus, they would probably burn the place down. So they have to be cleared up. But I don't think that it should be the cause of any actual concern in terms of America suddenly supporting this. I don't think they do.
No, no, but I mean, it is a little depressing that there's always going to be a cause and there's always going to be a rent-a-mob that's available. And I don't know how many people don't see through it. It gets the coverage on the news media.
But even the mainstream Mockingbird media is not giving them favorable coverage. I mean, I don't think anybody. They're not getting favorable coverage amongst anyone other than the radical left and people like Michael Jones, of course. But other than that, I mean, I don't see them as gaining traction. And I wonder why it's happening now, because I do think this hurts Biden, who has said nothing and who doesn't have any moral leadership as president. There's no sense of coming out and condemn. Ironically, his one statement, well, there were good people on both sides. Did you hear that?
Oh, yeah.
I think we know where that came from.
Yes.
Right, except in that case, it was completely out of context.
Well, there was, and the reason I have no sympathy for Biden whatsoever, there was an incident a couple of days ago where he's at a pro-abortion meeting of some kind.
Right.
And he does the sign of the cross backwards, by the way.
I can't even get that right.
Which is such a public scandal. A blasphemy.
What is he implying, that he's a good Catholic because he supports killing the
I mean, we could talk about that for a moment. All right. I don't really know what people think the word devout Catholic means. You can't be pro-abortion and be a Catholic, period. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Talk about a cafeteria Catholic. It's just so. The irony is that the media is so bereft of knowledge on religion. And this goes back to Bill Clinton. When Bill Clinton misquoted in the Beatitudes, the correct version is, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And Clinton said it deliberately, by the way. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will inherit the earth, knowing that the sycophant media didn't even know that that was a purposeful misquote. So that's how they can get away with it. I mean, it didn't. It
Well, I
didn't
mean,
hurt.
they control. I mean, I think that wasn't. Didn't they recite the? I think the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and they left out under God.
Yes.
Right. I mean, there was some recent. There's all this business of editing God, literally out of American life and American history, and yeah, I mean, this is an agenda. Um, that's I don't think helpful to them. I mean, what are they? Are there polls that indicate that less Americans believe in God? No, I don't think so. But
No, I think that that was the agenda that was pushed in the early '60s. But you know, if you go back, and this is what's interesting, if you go back to Madeleine Murray O'Hair,
mhm,
my take on her was that she was just an angry person. She
yeah,
was rejected by some guy who actually was a devout Catholic. You don't hear this much in the biographies. She wasn't really that much of an atheist. You know,
no,
I guess,
but she hated Catholics, probably for that
yeah,
reason.
yeah. So she was just an angry person.
She
She was,
and Margaret Sanger. Anyway, yep.
and uh, I happen to mention, I mean, this is funny for the older set, that of course, when she, quote, disappeared as a part of a stupid plot to take money away from American atheists,
Hmm.
and it took years to figure out who did it. And the way they identified the body that was buried, by the way, was by the serial number of her hip replacement.
Okay.
So I guess for all those people out there that have had hip replacements, there are millions of them. Never fear that if you
Mhm.
die in some bizarre way, you'll be identified by the serial number.
I think I interviewed years ago. Maybe I could get him back. William Murray, who was her son, and who became a minister.
Yeah, became a
And
Baptist minister, right?
yeah, and his book about her and his background really paints this really sordid and hateful image
Oh yeah,
um, of her and the cult around her. And she used him as a kid in the case by saying, "Oh, you can't say the prayer in school, and I'm going to sue the school." And it was like kind of a setup, but that she was just this really wicked individual, really very, very, very satanic. And
yeah. Well,
literally, I mean,
the
yeah,
other thing that happened with those cases is that she wasn't the prime mover in the school prayer thing. There were three other major cases of which hers was sort of brought into, but she became the public face uh, for some reason. I think that was bad PR because
right.
she was never a good public face. She was an angry
No.
person. She was quite
Didn't it?
unattractive.
Yes.
And But it is, as you say, it is interesting that the son that rejected her was the one that was used in the lawsuit. The
Right.
mama boy son who stayed with her was also killed in this crime. And he, in a bizarre manner, seemed to cooperate under a Stockholm syndrome with the captors. It was, this guy had an infinite number of chances to escape, to inform the authorities. Now, maybe it was a weird way of him getting back at her, but he got killed too. So,
Maybe
what?
after having been under her thumb for so long, anything seemed better. I don't know. It was yeah. I just the other thing I remember, and I'm old enough to remember that decision, was I remember that President John F. Kennedy spoke about it
Yes, he
at
did.
the time, and you could see that he was upset and that he understood that this was a real game changer in American culture and in American life, and it was very solemn, and it really was, and it did set the other point that William Murray made in his book. Legally, from a constitutional standpoint, the federal government, the federal courts, the Supreme Court had no jurisdiction to take that case. that was a local state matter. If anything, maybe that case could have been argued in front of the state Supreme Court.
Right.
But the Constitution relegates questions of religion, questions of faith to the states, not to the federal government. And in fact, technically speaking, a U.S. state can declare a sectarian religion as a state religion if they want to. That's, kind of went by the wayside in terms of American culture in the early 1800s when states stopped doing that and they started to follow the Rhode Island model, which was to not have a state religion.
Right. Right.
But under our constitutional system, a state has the right to have a state prayer, and the prayer was not a sectarian prayer. It was simply a moment to reflect on a greater force in nature. It used some rather kind of innocuous language, and to express gratitude for that force, and to express gratitude for the children in the school, for their parents, for their country, for their community. It was that simple. And it was not, it was not saying, it didn't mention Jesus. It didn't mention, anything particular. And so, it was entirely not only within the Constitution, the right of a state to have a state mandated prayer, but it was also very much in line with the U.S. custom of not having a particularly sectarian prayer, a general prayer to the Creator, to what Thomas Jefferson talked about, the nature and nature's God, right?
Well, those were
we're endowed by the Creator.
Put it in the context of those were the heady times, post-war, where the government was going to solve all these problems, and
Right.
It was the economy was relatively good, things were booming. So now what we're going to do is fix all these social problems, and of course it empowered this massive federal government. And you make the very good point. Supreme Court really didn't have a place.
They had no jurisdiction. I mean, courts all over the country, as a matter of routine, reject cases where they don't have jurisdiction. That's what you have clerks who work in all courts of all levels, federal, state, and local. And that's their job. They screen the case when it comes into the court, and they decide right away whether or not that case has any jurisdiction in that court. And the Supreme Court had no grounds, no jurisdiction to even hear that case. That is a state matter that belongs before a state court, not the federal court. And the fact that they did take that case shows that there were activists on that Supreme Court. Probably, if I could guess, it was probably Warren and Brennan who were behind that.
Well, Douglas too,
and Douglas, yeah, the three of them.
But
the three horsemen.
that's in the deep dark past, and that's part of history. I think bad history at this point, but so that's what empowered this. And now we're looking 60 years later as to what it wrought. So
yes.
But at the same time, you're going to have more people wake up, and I think they are, whether they watch this program or many others like it, where it's an alternative to the conventional media. And people really want to see that, because remember how many views Tucker Carlson got with that Putin interview. It was unbelievable. It's like 200 million views.
He got those views the second he stepped away from Fox.
Yeah.
And launched that station. I mean, they're railing with rage against, I was listening to this podcast the other day, Mission Implausible, right? I mean, that's the name of the podcast. It's these two old former CIA agents who talk about conspiracy, and they're on the left. They hate Trump. They had David Korn on from Nation Magazine, who's really a Trump hater, and it was just a hatchet job against Trump. However, I listen to it, and they do say things in between the lines that are interesting. And one of the things they'd say is that, look, the CIA is in the business of weaving conspiracy theories. That's how we do business. That's what we do, as a way to get people to perceive something over here when it's actually going on over there. That's what governments do. That's what wars are about. It's in the Bible. If you take a look at the battles that Joshua had in conquering Canaan, there were, well, we're going to put these troops in this side, but we're going to then circle them over on this side. We're going to create an image of this happening when in fact that's going to happen. That's strategy. I mean, it's just the nuts and bolts of any government is to weave a conspiracy theory to create an image that will then be used to their advantage. But what was I going to say? Anyway, it was a very powerful interview. But
I have to admire you for exposing yourself to this stuff, so maybe we don't have to.
well, I have to find out what the opposition's up to. In fact, I'm going to try to have him on my show. I mean, we'll see. But the point that I make is basically that in spite of an enormous effort to suppress speech, they did not succeed. They did, and Elon Musk came along, and he did liberate, to a certain extent, Twitter. Not all the way, but it's improved, and they despise him for that. You know, he's loathed because they're openly calling for control of communication, and that has not happened because of various other players who have come out and filled that gap. Because look, in this country, our tradition is to have an open speech. And by the way, I am very critical of the ADL and some of these big American Jewish organizations for being at the forefront of suppression of speech. And I blame them partially for these pro-Hamas rallies, because when you suppress speech, including vile speech and anti-Semitic speech, it's going to find an outlet, and it's going to become like a pressure cooker, and people are going to find it. And by the way, they did nothing to suppress the far left form of anti-Semitism. That was fine. But
is Greenblatt ever going to turn, or is he too invested in being a leftist Jew?
I don't, you know, I've reached out. I've tried to interview them. I mean, they hate me. I think. I don't think so, because that's what they are. They're socialists. They're they're socialists first, and they're Jewish and American second. I don't know, and I'm not sure in what order. but the point is that the suppressing of speech does bear some blame. I would rather, maybe I'm almost a purist in this regard, but I think that free speech and having an open debate with the Hamas supporters and is the better way to go, because I think they can be challenged and they can be beaten in the open forum of ideas and expression. Let them say what they say, and let's counter it in public and have the debate. By suppressing it, it only serves to amplify their position. And there's, oh, you see, look what they're doing. The Jews, they're suppressing my speech because we're right. No.
Well, have you ever asked yourself why people like E. Michael Jones, I mean, this is going to sound weird, but go ahead and be anti-Semitic. But why are you ruining your case by aligning with people who are lunatics? I mean, why does he have to?
Well, it's because his primary focus is his obsession with the Jews and Judaism, and he approaches it from a very arcane Christian position, which has been rejected by most of Christianity. And that's, it's a narrow alley that he goes down, and he'll ally himself with anyone. He's went to Tehran. He's sitting there with the mullahs playing footsie. It's just anyone who's opposed to Israel and the Jews he's with them.
So is that enough a support base for him to keep going?
I think that he gets invited on programs, and he's lauded. He only goes on shows that people show him respect and love. He doesn't like opposition, and I don't. He's kind of fallen into a habit with it. It's not challenged, and yeah, it's sad because he's a great intellect. I mean,
Well,
you know,
that's what I'm saying. Why doesn't he channel? There are obvious differences between the Christian interpretation and the Jewish interpretation, and you can have some lively debates and discussions
exactly.
about that. But to turn this into some sort of hatred, where now he aligns himself with the lunatic fringe, I don't get it. I think it's just limiting whatever appeal he might have.
Well, I mean, look, for a while he was debating me, and
Yeah.
then he kind of started to publicly accuse me of lying. Why did he say I was lying? For only one reason, because I'm a Jew, and therefore I'm lying because Jews, all they do is lie.
Ah,
And invite you would only come up category was Israel's committing genocide, and I wouldn't do that. I'm not going to be told what to believe. I don't believe that, and so that's where we left it. And at the same time, I did call him out, and he was mortified by noting that he has never said anything about the genuine genocide against Christians and Catholics in the Islamic world. At the same time, on Christmas Day, a group of radical Muslims broke into a church in Nigeria and slaughtered 100 Christians who were praying. Has he ever said anything about the Armenian genocide,
yeah.
right, going on right now in Nagorno-Karabakh? So he came back at me and said, well, I'm just bringing this up to deflect attention from Israel. No, I've been talking about this for decades. I've interviewed people. I have a record of this. You could look at my archives. I'm not just bringing this up. He's never brought it up because it doesn't fit a narrative that, frankly, is ultimately anti-Christian, but it certainly calls into question Islamic hegemony around the world. And it's one that aligns itself with the radical left, and it is anti-Israel. That's his primary focus. He doesn't give a damn about Christians in Africa and in Armenia being slaughtered. Anyway, thanks for
Yeah.
letting me get that off my chest.
Oh no, I mean, I've always wondered why he went down that rabbit hole, but then so did Michael Hoffman.
Right.
It's almost inescapable that
And so did Joe Sobran, by the way, who I also admired at the time, and he was a great intellect, but he got into at the end of his life, he went deep into
well,
anti-Israel
it
and
was the same
anti-Jew.
thing that happened to Sam Francis.
Right.
They had a core audience, they thought, of people that were anti-Semitic, and it was too bad because he was, especially in the case of Sobran, was losing the mainstream
Right.
uh, to appeal to this particular aspect. I never understood it. It was
Well, it does seem that once you start down that rabbit hole,
you can't stop.
eventually, yeah,
Yeah.
you can't stop. It becomes like catnip, and you become diminished. And it's too bad because ultimately it hurts good causes. If people who are bringing up important things about an international establishment that is amoral. I mean, he has brilliant ideas about the corruption that pornography has had on people, and how the establishment pushes that,
Right.
and how the diminution of moral standards. All of that is compromised and tainted by this obsession with the Jews. Anyways, Mike, what do you have coming up on your
All
Substack?
right. I because we were earlier today, I couldn't finish it. I have a piece that's going to appear later today called "Over the Edge," uh, which is going to go into some interesting aspects of what's happening now, with a reference back to the cult film from 1979 that was the debut of Matt Dillon. But we make those kind of references. But
What is the cult film Over the Edge?
the film Over the, I mean, briefly, Over the Edge was a film that was made on a shoestring budget,
Mm-hmm.
and it had to do with disaffected teenagers that were living in a planned community that resorted to some acts of vandalism And this was based on a true story that happened in Foster City, California. And it was well done. It didn't get, it was in the theaters for about 10 minutes, but it got a bit of exposure on cable, and after the years became a cult film. And in fact, I linked to, you can watch it on YouTube with ads.
Okay.
Or you might
I'm
even
going to check it out.
Yeah, so it's going to be up later today.
Excellent.
And as always, enjoyable. So we look
Great.
forward.
And I linked to your Substack on the show, so if anybody wants to check it out, you can do it there. And excellent. All right, Mike, listen, thanks so much for joining me as always.
All right, talk to you next.